using my money. What about the one I give to? Here, I have garlic.
From an early age, we are inundated with images of the orphan. From advertising to popular culture, the child in need is a prominent figure in our zeitgeist. All over the world, young people are stirred by these images to try and make a difference and offer a helping hand. Volunteering in orphanages has become an increasingly popular activity for young Australians, one that has come under a great deal of scrutiny in recent times. Freya de Wildebar spent 8 months at an orphanage in Ghana caring for children. She was one of the fresh faces appearing at the orphanage, ready to work and do what she could to help. But her experience was not what she had expected.
I was kind of weird about volunteering to begin with because I was really conscious of the whole like Western aid problems and that like so many people can go in and just like fuck it up. But the company I went with was secular and they had a lot of great reviews and they have placements all throughout the world, and so I thought it would be legit.
Critics argue that the constant flow of volunteers coming and going detrimentally affects the children, the volunteers becoming just another in a long list of people who have abandoned them. Also contributing to discussion is the fetishization of other cultures, as if starving children were a tourist attraction.
It's much harder to develop a relationship with the older children because they're more standoffish. They've had experiences where people come in and they make promises and they make friendships and then they leave back to their home country.
But the orphanage Freya volunteered at had problems of its own. A certain Mr. Anim, the owner of the orphanage, an abusive and corrupt individual.
He would try and kick them out of their house, send them to a hometown that they hadn't been in over 10 years. They didn't know if they had any family there. He wouldn't give them any money to leave, but he would come in and say, you know, you have to leave now or I'll hurt you. He would threaten them and they would be scared, and we would have to go to him in his little spot under the trees where he always sat and beg him to allow these children to stay in the orphanage. And we would message Eddie, who is the head of IVHQ Ghana, about it, and he'll say, you know, the children will have to beg. They'll have to get down on their knees and beg him to be allowed to stay.
But Freya's complaints fell on deaf ears with the IVHQ, the organisation responsible for the orphanage.
And they were very unhelpful with that. Their main focus is to make sure that volunteers stay there and that they keep paying. They don't have any involvement with the home itself.
Freya joined 2 other volunteers, Kat and Kaz, in an attempt to establish a halfway house to get the kids back into family care.
Over a couple of weeks, Kat and Kaz developed a plan to get the kids out of the orphanage and to start our own kind of like a halfway house or a shelter where we would get these children from our orphanage and then other children eventually, but we were going to do our kids first, find their families because most of them do have families. 4 out of 5 Ghanaian orphans have at least one living parent, and they end up in orphanages because their families can't afford to feed them or they can't afford to school them or clothe them. And so what we were going to do was find their families, get them back into their hometowns with their village, and support them through their family, pay for their schooling and for their food, and help their family support them because that's where children should be growing up instead of institutions, especially when they don't need to be there.
However, before the 3 could take action, the orphanage was shut down by the Ghanaian social services. Mr. Anim and the kids went off the radar, some being sent home without money and some staying with Mr. Anim in a local house, still being denied access to fundamental resources and services.
So they're kind of just in this awful limbo. And so we had many meetings with social welfare saying they need to be taken, you can't just leave them here. We wrote up an entire document which was all of our accounts of what had happened, but the children being abused, the children not being allowed to go to seek medical care, the children not having a toilet, just things like that with photos. We compiled it, and between us we had like 22 months of being at the orphanage, and we gave it to social welfare and they're like, okay, we're going to try our best, but they still have not gone back and taken the children. So we're kind of stuck. We've tried every option.
While we might have a romantic idea of what volunteering is like, Freya's case shows that things can be a lot tougher than a couple of weeks playing with kids.
I wouldn't volunteer again without a skill, whether I was a teacher or a builder or an architect or a doctor or whatever. I think that's really amazing because you can go, you can learn methods from the local people, you can teach them your methods, and you're actually like contributing something as opposed to just being like an 18 or 19-year-old girl just going there and like hanging out with kids for 3 months or whatever, because you're not actually doing anything.